During more than 50 years in operation, South Park was Eureka's premier recreational destination. Racing, baseball, fairs and pavilion exhibits, dancing, hot air balloons, and airplanes were among the attractions a visitor might see in a given season. Development and changing attitudes ultimately doomed the park, where today the track and the name of the adjacent neighborhood have been largely forgotten. The digitization of the Humboldt Times a couple of years ago by the California Digital Newspaper Collection was essential to this presentation. While its earliest issues weren't included, the years that were 1874 to 1925 were a time of rapid change, and researchers are fortunate that such a resource exists. Eureka was home to numerous other newspapers, and often articles and ads that appeared in one did not always appear in the others. And I'm hoping that the digitization of many more will occur in the coming years. These include the West Coast Signal, Nerve, the Californian, the Western Watchman, the Sunday Letter, the Evening Herald, the Citizen, and most importantly, the Humboldt Standard. And there were more. This map from 1865 shows an earlier circular track, shown below, at Rick's Prairie, which is east of today's Henderson Center. This was presumably Eureka's first track. William Clark opened the track at South Park in 1866, and I assume that Rick's must have closed shortly thereafter. While his estate retained ownership for the next 50 years, he began leasing the property in 1868. Charles Fairfield and Frank Barnum were among the first to lease the grounds. During the late 19th and early 20th century, numerous businesses used the South Park name. The hotel was usually leased by the same party as the track. And as typical of races, short little blurbs would show up, not even full advertisements. This one was for 3 one-mile heats for a purse of $10. In October of 1874, in addition to several heat races, there was going to be a greased pig and sack race and other scrub races. And the names at this point include Comet, Honest John, and Algerine. The greased pig escaped before the race started and he was not found. In October of 1874, the races were canceled due to the high tide covering the grounds. And a few months later, on January 21st, 1875, the depth on the track was reported to be 3 feet. Tide-related closures were a semi-regular occurrence until the mid-1880s, when the railbed for the Eureka and the Eel River and Eureka Railroad was constructed. And over the years, racing was common on New Year's Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Admission Day, and 4th of July. In July of 1875, the foundation was laid for a pork packing plant near the Rush slaughterhouses, which is located near the south end of the track. And on December 8th, 1875, Loudon & Co.'s Humboldt Pork Packing and Provisions Company is in operation. And the next year, some of the events advertised included social dance and foot race. This is a typical Humboldt Times ad for the track. Most were usually pretty visually uninteresting, and it would be redundant to show more than a few. During this era, horses were named Signal, Towhead, Minnie Little, Lady Seymour, Pet, Overland, Old Blue, Pilot, Arnett, Old Tom, Cricket, Rowena, and Molly McCracken. On April 13th, 1877, a race is advertised for a single rider 50-mile race. 10 horses would be used in exchange after every mile, with a 2-hour, 15-minute time limit. With 53 seconds to spare, N.G. Smith completed the race in 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 7 seconds. An article in the Humboldt Times on July 18th, 1877 reported that Clark Slough is recalled as a popular swimming spot for as many as 20 local boys at a time, but the neighbors complained and they ultimately had to find a new spot. In 1877, it's reported that McCann is overhauling his South Park lathe and shingle mill, lath and single mill. The engine for the plant is being built by the Eureka foundry. On November 27th, 1877, shooting matches for turkey, geese, and chickens were advertised. And October 30th, 1878, C.C. Fairfield reacquired the lease and begins installing a baseball field. This is the first time I see baseball mentioned at the park. On July 25th, 1879, construction of a new pavilion is announced. And on March 5th, 1881, a target shooting challenge is announced for the Eureka Guard. It was 10 shots at 200 yards for a $10 purse. This is a somewhat regular occurrence after this point, for at least a few years. Humboldt, on May 28th, 1882, Fairfield announces the construction of a new target range. And on June 7th, 1882, the Eureka Jockey Club is organized, and their first event was held on the 4th of July of that year. This is the first, or this is probably the most interesting ad that I've seen for the park, and it came out in the Business Director of 1884, 1885. Although this map and the one you'll see in a moment are from later, they help illustrate how the Eel River and Eureka Railroad controlled the tidal flooding that caused numerous canceled events prior to its completion in 1884. The railbed divided the property running through the baseball field. And this map from 1915 shows the railbed's proximity to the track. The track shown is actually the second half-mile track and third overall. The original half-mile track was slightly to the west. This will be clear in a later photo. The baseball field was rebuilt at a different location. And during this era, teams included the Excelsiors, Painters, Clerks, Coasters, Mutuals, Crickets, Knickerbockers, Stars, Typos, and Ingomars. On January 27th, 1886, it was reported that the California Arms Company had tested their latest product at the track. The company acquired the rights to manufacture the W.R. Finch rifle in November of 1883 and incorporated early the following year. And this is the Finch breech loading rifle. There were ultimately, despite being reportedly being of excellent quality, production numbers were quite low, and that makes the rifle extremely valuable today. These images are from a Weatherall's auction. In June of 1887, a survey was made in consideration of lengthening the track from a half-mile to 1 mile. And the new track would again require the baseball field to be sacrificed. In August of 1887, Flanagan and Brosnan's Union Mill at the west end of Whipple Street was reported to be providing the sawdust for the new track, and a new pavilion was planned for the spring of the following year. On March 25th, 1888, the 1 mile track was completed. And on April 12th, the Eureka Bicycle Club was using the track to practice. Accidents were abundant. You could also take riding lessons at the track. Horse and bicycle, I assume. August 23rd, 1888, the Eureka Street Railway, this is the horse-drawn railway, announced that work on the line to South Park will be commenced the following year. Actual construction began in late May of 1889. On July 14th, 1889, a balloon ascension is planned by Professor E.T. Owings for August, following a burst balloon on July 4th. The balloon, named Eureka, was manufactured locally. I did not find any information that this occurred in August. Balloon ascensions were often canceled or went wrong. January 6, 1890, William Clark begins construction of a new South Park hotel. This attention-grabbing ad is for a shooting match. The full ad is really vague, and the actual objective of the shooters is unclear, but it was interesting anyway. Hazel Keys was scheduled for a balloon ascension and parachute drop on March 17th, 1891. However, the headline the next day makes it clear that Miss Keys did not ascend. Due to wind conditions, when the balloon was 2/3 full, an order was given to let it go. Some of the poles used to stabilize it while being filled fell into the crowd, severely injuring a young boy and causing numerous minor wounds. September 9th, 1891, the native sons and daughters of the Golden West held a ring tournament with 12 knights, drawing the largest crowd ever at a park. I assume this looked more like the picture on the left with the single ring. These would have been 2-inch rings. There were 9 of them. They were spaced 60 feet apart, and each knight had 3 heats, 3 attempts to have the highest score. On July 5th, 1892, a bike race from Salmon Creek to Eureka was kind of unusual in that both riders and spectators boarded the train at the train station west of 2nd and E and rode it all the way down to Salmon Creek, probably somewhere around the overpass where the Humboldt Bay Wildlife Refuge entrance is, and the road to Table Bluff. The riders then disembarked and went ahead and got started, and the train ultimately caught up to the riders and then kept pace with the leader all the way back into town. So the riders were able to watch the front of the race from the train, which was pretty cool. September 9th, 1892, the Humboldt Wheelmen sponsored a parade and bicycle races for Admission Day. And this is just kind of thrown in there to illustrate how popular bicycle riding was, and the Humboldt Wheelmen were one of many bicycle clubs. April 1st, 1893, new operator George Dean plans improvements including trap shooting, new pistol and rifle ranges, and a field for football. Teams included the Acmes and the Pastimes. Masquerade balls were often scenes of theft and alcohol abuse. And this image anyway, sorry, despite the political commentary about law enforcement, is apparently a warning to would-be troublemakers to let them know that their shenanigans would not be tolerated. Just 2 years later, a little less than 2 years later, the hall burns and is a total loss. Fires were obviously very common with wood structures, and as far as I know, nothing like this ever replaced it in the South Park or that area of Broadway. January 19th, 1894, it was advertised that 100 men were wanted to drink mineral water at South Park. It's probably for the Humboldt Mineral Water Company, but it's not clear. I just thought it was an interesting ad, and I would have liked to wondered what that was all about, possibly to give feedback on quality. On July 21st, 1895, an estimated 2,500 people attended a day of racing, while 1,200 more watched from Marine Heights. And Marine Heights would be in the top right corner of the screen, the area that's above Broadway, beyond the bluff. August 24th, 1898, the equestrian track record is reported to be 2 minutes and 15 seconds for a mile, and that was set the previous July. February 19th, 1900, J.G. Leverin, current leasee, exhibits his new automobile and takes attendees for a ride around the track. I believe this was the first automobile in Humboldt County. Leverin is also the owner of a shingle mill and hothouse at the end of U Street, the only in the state at that time, used for the growing of vegetables. Sorry, 1 second. August 17th, 1890, the Humboldt Bay Woolen Mill Company completes initial construction on 5 buildings. The two-story main building is 140 feet long by 58 feet wide and fronts Broadway. The dye house next door is the next largest at 56 by 54 feet. August 28th, 1900, J.E. Paul test drives an automobile of his own design. Casting and heavy ironwork was done by the Eureka foundry. And this is the Humboldt Bay Woolen Mill as seen from the corner of Broadway and Whipple, at the time now 14th Street. This map from 1901 shows the full mile course that had been completed in 1888. You can see to the right of where it says race course, you can see that that street is Del Norte. And if you look further to the right, you can see the original name was Murray Avenue. The Del Norte was ultimately extended and bisects the field. We'll talk about in just a moment. So we've chronologically caught up with the map that we've been using as a background, so we can hear some of the major features that were shown on this map at that time. And this map was published in 1902 by Noe and Georgeson, and Eureka is incredibly lucky to have such a beautiful, well-made map. There wasn't any aerial photography from that time, and this map is absolutely incredible for its accuracy. In 1903, that extension that I mentioned of Murray Street, now Del Norte, bisects the track. The track technically remained open, but what was odd is that the people on the road actually had the right of way. So if there had been a race, I don't know that there were, but if there had been, the racers would have potentially had to stop for people crossing the road. On July 21st, 1905, it was announced that the Humboldt Transit Company is working on its 5th Street line to South Park, and it opened on September 8th, and this was the Eureka's electric streetcar system. It had opened in 1903. On March 8th, 1907, the track has become challenging for racing since a new property owner built a fence blocking a section of the track. Training continues, but a new half-mile track is proposed. And as little lots were sold, this became more and more of a problem, even though it didn't actually shut the track until a bit later. On September 18th, 1907, automobile and motorcycle races are held. And again, there's pretty early mention of any kind of motored vehicles being on the track. November 26, 1908, basketball games are held, and it's the first mention I could find of that. Might have been at the pavilion, it did not say. March 24th, 1909, by this point, the 1 mile track is considered unusable. May 13th, 1909, work on the new half-mile track is expected to begin within a few days. And on August 7th of that year, Blaine Selvage's secret test flights are publicized. Selvage makes 7 flights in a monoplane of his own invention. He's one of the earliest early West Coast aviator, and the first in Humboldt County to fly a plane, and it was his own design. September 15th, 1909, the Orton Troupe presents a high wire bicycle act. And on September 16th, 2 world records were broken by champion Craves, a half-mile track record for a mile and the half-mile. And this is what the bicycle act may have looked like. October 8th, 1909, the driving club leases the park. This kind of goes to show how automobiles were finally starting to become more and more popular, particularly with the 1908 introduction of the Model T. April 24th, 1910, one of the best known man birds on the Pacific coast, according to the Humboldt Times, Colonel Frank Johnson's may fly at the park. And then just 2 months later, it's announced that Frank Free will fly a French biplane on July 4th. 5,000 are expected to attend. However, mechanical problems ultimately grounded his flight, and the Johnson flight was never mentioned again perhaps Free was taking his place, or it was just a mistake. And this is the ad from that 1910 planned Frank Free flight. This is the only photo that I've seen of actual horse racing at the park. I don't know the exact era. I would imagine this was in the 1900s. Motorcycle racing and a biplane are on the track. This may have been 1913, but I'm not entirely sure. On July 13th, 1913, the day's events include motorcycle races and a Wild West show consisting of the riding of bucking horses, wild steer, and a heretofore unridden mule. On May 13th, 1915, a 100-mile motorcycle race is scheduled. The top speed for the track is estimated to be 59 miles per hour. This photo is in the Humboldt County Historical Society's collection, labeled a South Park. This is just a detail, and the full photo makes me a little dubious as to whether this actually is Eureka South Park. But I like this photo, and I particularly like the guy in the back. Not only is he wearing those Lone Ranger goggles, but he appears to be smoking a cigar. Over at the Woolen Mills, by this time, probably called the Eureka Woolen Mill, as it was for most of its latter existence. You can see the loom used at that in 1917. This would have been the second floor of the main building, and then on the right, the more modern loom that would have replaced that. I don't know when this photo was taken, but I'm guessing 40s. This photo shows the expansion of the Woolen Mill. This was an ongoing process for decades, really. A number of this building this was kind of its second and final iteration, but a number of the other buildings on the property were expanded, torn down, and replaced for larger buildings. And you can see, if you look here on the photo on the top, you can see this pop-out wing on the Broadway side has been turned into what I suppose would be a dormer, and the building has been extended down 14th Street, which cut the building next door in half, it appears. And this ad from a bit later shows just how much the whole facility had expanded. The buildings on the far left and did not exist in the original 5-building plan. So those are fairly substantial buildings. On September 8th, 1915, William Clark and Sons placed the property on the market as they prepare to sell 350 lots in their Clark South Park edition. However, this didn't happen right away, or at least not many of the lots sold, and the streets weren't developed other than Murray, because racing did continue here and there over the next couple of years. September of 1916, we see horse and motorcycle racing, and then August of 1917, horse racing, which I believe was the last time there's any mention of horse racing. This shows that plan. Again, at this point, none of these streets were actually laid out except for, I guess, Murray. On February 25th, 1919, the Lasky Film Company filmed thrilling scenes, according to the Humboldt Times, at the park for the Valley of the Giants, based on the novel of the same name. On June 18th, 1919, car racing and boxing for the first time at the park, and potentially only time, as the park was closing right about the same era. And April 16th, 1920, a section of property, including the baseball field, again, is sold to the State Highway Commission. And by June of 1921, the property is described in the Humboldt Times as a cow pasture. This really incredible aerial from 1931 shows all 3 tracks. The original track is actually in the top right. And then the 1 mile track is obviously the much larger track that follows all the way around south of Hawthorne. And then the new 1909 track is shown more or less in the center of the screen on the right-hand side of Murray. And this shot from the 1930s shows the South Park Hotel and the main building and gas station for the auto court. There's the visible pumps. And this Merle Schuster aerial from 1948 shows, again, a bit of development at the Woolen Mills, as far as I don't know exactly if all these buildings were still attached to the Woolen Mill at this point, but a number of large buildings have been added here. And then if you notice here on the opposite side of this, diagonally across the street from the Woolen Mill, this block long section of buildings that no longer exists. Not terribly ornate, except for maybe the one on the end. These are all gone. If you'd like to see more presentations like this, we greatly ask that you consider supporting the Humboldt County Library and becoming a member if you haven't already. This is the contact information. And that concludes my presentation for the day. I'm open to any questions you might have. I also have a lot of information about early Eureka in general. So if you don't want to talk about just about South Park, that's fine too. So were there any questions?
Yeah, while we wait to see if there's any questions in the chat, I'll go ahead and talk about some library updates that we've got going on. We have finally gone back to our pre-COVID library hours. So we are now open late on Wednesdays. We open at 10 on Fridays. So there's more hours available for you to come in and enjoy the library. We're slowly bringing the second story back. So the Serendipity bookstore will be open the same hours we're open starting next week. And the Humboldt room, the historical room, will be open on Fridays. We're still kind of working on staffing on that. We're hoping to get back to our regular hours there, but we should be able to come in on Fridays without having to make an appointment and just come in and drop in. And on that note, it looks like we don't have any questions. So Michael, did you have any last thoughts or anything else? Oh, there is a question. Where was the 1895 racetrack that drew 2,500 people? And how did they get to it?
So that was that track that was built in 1888. Let me see if I can just back up. I'll show you the map. So this was the mile track. The entrances for the track, I don't believe ever changed. They would have always been, I think, in the neighborhood of the hotel. I think this might have changed. I think at one point there was a separate entrance, and then later on you actually had to go through the hotel or the grounds that the hotel was on. So yeah, this was again, this would have been the mile track that huge crowd drew, and then the people watching would have been up on the bluffs, kind of between, I guess, probably like around Del Norte or Sonoma Street.
Okay, and a follow-up question, did they get there by train?
People certainly did take the train if you were living out of the area. There were mentions often of people coming in by train, or the train was particularly full that day. People took streetcars, and on that day that question references, there talk about how every all the stables had basically rented out all of their wagons and horses, and people were taking the streetcars, and so yeah, people would kind of people walked, so people were using any means they had at their disposal to get there. This is very much probably the focus of recreation at that time in Eureka. So these were really well attended, even the days that didn't necessarily seem like huge events. Usually probably had at least a few hundred people. So yeah, very I think they really made it a point to make sure that the streetcars and all these things came as close as possible to it.
And did the pedestrians ever have to cross the racetrack, or did they find ways around the racetrack?
Other than when Murray or Del Norte was extended, there wasn't anything like that. It was all a private property. The only thing that comes to mind in terms of that would be that at one point, an earlier, I don't know if it was an actual range or just when they would set up shooting, they were shooting across the track, but these wouldn't have been necessarily days that there were racing going on. And then later on, they put in a new range that was not in conflict with the tracks, possibly parallel to it. So yeah, I think that would kind of be about the only time that you would have had any kind of issue, because it was a completely enclosed track. They did a lot of training. People could to stable their horses there, and they did training, or people could go out and just ride and things like that. So I don't know if there was ever any conflict when people were using it for various different events, but I would tend to think that like the shooting practice and the those sort of things would have all been sanctioned scheduled days, so people would have known not to go use the track for other purposes that day.
And it looks like someone was just wondering why there aren't more photos of the races since they were so popular. Was it just because maybe photography wasn't as readily available as it is later?
Yeah, I know. I can't remember the year, but I think Jim Garrison had told me that photography in, I want to say 1895 or maybe 1900 was that you would basically get a camera with 5 shots in it, and then you would have to send the camera off after you'd taken your 5 shots to have it develop. It was an incredibly expensive hobby for most people up until a little bit later, probably in the 1910s or 20s, when Kodak and and Polaroid and some of these companies started making their own more affordable cameras. So I think that, if you think about just even when I went on national park or road trips when I was younger, you had a roll of film and you kind of picked and choose which shots you took. And now I might come back from a trip and have 1,500 photos with maybe 200 or 300 in the same day. So I think that back then people were really particular about what they took a shot of, because it was so expensive and difficult to have the process done. Really the reality is that there could be all kinds of photos out there. It's just that they didn't make their way into the public collections of the Humboldt County Historical Society or the libraries or the Clark Museum. So there probably were more photos, but they just haven't made them into any collections that I had access to or that I was able to find. But really, I did for the most part use all the actual photos that I had or I found. So yeah, I agree. It probably is just a little bit underrepresented, but there probably are photos out there in people's attics.
All right. And it looks like we don't have any more questions. So unless you have any closing remarks, we'll go ahead and let everybody go for the day.
No, I think that's it. I think appreciate everyone being here. It was fun to talk about this kind of forgotten part of town.
All right, well, I will go ahead and let everybody go. We will put this recording up on our YouTube page on Tuesday, and Michael's previous presentation is also there, so be sure to check that out. And otherwise, we will see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you.